gentle marketers. Welcome to episode 60 of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm and changing it to a gentler approach, one that's based on empathy and kindness. I'm Sarah Zinacroce, as always. I'm your host, and you know that you're in the right place if you are a heart-centered entrepreneur or change maker who is looking for a better way to market your business. Or you might also be a marketing impact pioneer. So that's someone who's working in an organization who does business for good. Today's episode falls under the P of personal power of the Gentle Marketing Mandala. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can download your one-page marketing plan with the gentle marketing version of the 7 Ps of marketing at sarahzinacroce.com/one page. That link is also in the description in case you're listening to this on a mobile app. So today's episode is a big one for, I would say, every entrepreneur: self-doubt, right? I can think of at least 3 to 5 things right now where I'm doubting myself. For example, the Kickstarter campaign that I'm launching in just about 2 weeks. P.S. If it would really mean the world to me if you came over to sarahzinacroce.com/Kickstarter to make me feel supported. There's nothing worse than hosting a party and have no one show up, right? So anyways, self-doubt affects us all, I think. So that's why I brought on Olivia da Silva, who made self-doubt her area of expertise, and she's currently writing a book about it. So here's some more information on Olivia. Olivia qualified as a transformational life coach in 2017 after 20 years of personal and spiritual development. She has a highly practical approach to working with spiritual concepts and a great passion for developing human potential. Her coaching philosophy is simply that everything you need is already within you. Even though your life may not look exactly the way you want it to look, everything you need to improve your life, you already have. There's nothing more you need to add or to achieve. Olivia came into this work after she found herself in a soulless and superficial place in her mid-30s. After a series of events, she qualified as a transformational life coach and published her first book, Your Whole Life Economy: Recognize Your True Value and Improve Your Quality of Life. And as I said, she's now currently working on her second book, The Purpose of Self-Doubt, which is the result of 2.5 years independent research into this question. So some of the things we talk about on this episode are self-doubt and uncertainty given the time we live in right now, self-doubt versus imposter syndrome, and I asked the question whether they are the same thing or not. Then we talk about how hesitation is different from procrastination, what we can learn from self-doubt, and a healthy and unhealthy amount of self-doubt, and much more. I really hope you'll enjoy our conversation and take some refuge in the fact that you are not alone when you're doubting yourself. So here's Olivia and I. Hi, Olivia. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, Sarah.
Good to talk to you again. We've talked before, so it's nice to connect again.
Yeah, I'm excited to be having this conversation with you. I love connecting with people through my work and having opportunities to talk about my work. So I really thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I couldn't have thought of a better person than you to talk about this. And as I said, I'm kind of experiencing self-doubt on a personal level right now with my oldest son, Simon. I'll get into that later. But I think it's also just in general, a topic that comes up over and over again when you think about running a business, and especially when you think about marketing. And even more so for my gentle marketers, right?
Yes.
Because we're like, really, I have to market myself, but, really, should I put this out there? And do I really want to toot my own horn? And so all these questions. So I think it's such an important topic, this idea of self-doubt. I think it's also right now just really in the zeitgeist, like, with what we're living through COVID related, not knowing what's coming, so much uncertainty. Do you feel like there is more openness to talk about self-doubt than before?
I think in general, I mean, I would say COVID has certainly brought a lot of stuff to the surface that was already there. But COVID has brought a lot of stuff to the surface, not just self-doubt and uncertainty, but other things that, to a level where it's very difficult to ignore them anymore. But in general, I think, well, I wouldn't say, I don't know about actually talking about self-doubt as such. I think self-doubt's still rather unpopular. Maybe we'll get onto why, I don't know. But I think in general, people are much more aware and open to talking about mental health generally. And so that possibly leads into it. And people are much more open to vulnerability and shame and things like that, thanks to the work of people like Brené Brown. Yeah, so I think in general, there's a lot more openness, but I still think self-doubt is rather an unpopular term.
Yeah, it's true. And it's funny that you brought up Brené Brown and shame, because that's my first thought was like, well, self-doubt is kind of a similar word to shame. It's like this thing that we don't really want to spell out and admit and, identify ourselves with, I guess.
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot of resistance. It's just, I think in general, it's seen as a weakness. And that not a weakness that's okay to talk about, really. So a lot of my work it does get into sensitive areas quite soon, quite quickly because of that. Yeah. Which actually, as working as a coach, is quite beneficial because you get to the heart of the matter quickly. It cuts through barriers. And so that's one of the reasons I really love working with self-doubt, because it gets to the heart of the challenge quite quickly.
It's true. It's like immediately, rather than just saying I'm an executive business coach or whatever, right? Yeah. You're like, I'm, working on self-doubt. So immediately people who resonate or kind of identify with that, they're kind of pulled towards you, where others, where they're not there yet in their journey, they're not aware, maybe less so.
Well, I think because I talk about self-doubt in a positive way. So my curiosity, if you like, is about the purpose of self-doubt. I came into it with this question, wondering if self-doubt had a purpose. And so because I talk about self-doubt in a different way, it does get people's attention. So people who do identify with experiencing self-doubt will think, oh, that's interesting. I never thought that it could be a positive thing. And that's a relief to think of it like that. And then also people who are more resistant. I mean, self-doubt it's part of being human. We all do experience self-doubt. And so people who are maybe not so open to it can be a little bit more open to it because I'm talking about it in a more positive way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess without context, self-doubt might be perceived as negative. But the minute you give that positive context, people are like, oh, I'm not alone. And oh, it's actually okay to be in that space. And I think that makes all the difference.
Yeah. I mean, shall I say something a little bit more about?
Yeah, let's define it a bit. I also want to throw in that topic of imposter syndrome, but because that's also sometimes that comes up with gentle marketers. They're not even sure that they really know, what the difference is. So maybe we can go there a little bit.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll just say something a little bit about why I see self-doubt as a positive thing, and then I'll go on to the talk about imposter syndrome because it's probably a slightly different angle.
Sounds good.
But, essentially, self-doubt is part of the human experience. I've had to redefine self-doubt a little bit in my book, in the book that I'm writing at the moment. I've had to redefine it a little bit because the dictionary kind of gave it quite a lazy definition, which was just about, self-doubt is a lack of confidence. So it doesn't tell you what self-doubt is. It tells you what you've not got, which is confidence. And incidentally, I don't see confidence and self-doubt as two separate things. I think having self-doubt with confidence can be really beneficial. But essentially self-doubt, so the question of self-doubt, if if you ask yourself where self-doubt is showing up in your life, it links to something that you want. So if you're doubting yourself about the message that you're putting out there around your business and your marketing, it's telling you that you want to put a message out there about your business and your marketing, quite simply. So there's a desire on the other side of that self-doubt, and the self-doubt is reflecting that. And then the other thing about that is that, the thing that you're doubting yourself about is usually important, because otherwise you wouldn't be doubting yourself. People just don't doubt themselves about things that are not important. Mm-hmm. So the reflection of like how overwhelming self-doubt, the experience of self-doubt might be, is just a reflection of that. Well, this is something that's really important for me. And when you're talking about people who, I imagine you're dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, maybe, who have a personal brand. So what they're marketing is stuff that's, it's stuff that's deeply important to them. It comes from their heart, and they've invested a lot into what they're doing, probably a lifetime in some senses, because it takes a lot to develop that kind of business. So you're doing something that's really important to you. And so I think it's really natural to doubt yourself, and it's really okay to doubt yourself. So it's about, talking about the gentle revolution. It's about being with that self-doubt in a much more gentle way and finding the messages that it gives you. And then the other thing really about self-doubt, you'll only be doubting yourself when you're outside your comfort zone. We can all avoid self-doubt by just simply staying in a comfort zone, staying in a job that's not really challenging us, but it's okay, it's bringing in the money, but, it may not be fully satisfying, but, you don't have to live in self-doubt because you just built a zone of comfort, right? So, you'll be experiencing self-doubt and you're in a zone of growth, really. So self-doubt is indicative of growth. So there's really just two principles there, but there's so much else, really, that I would say. When I coach people around self-doubt, this is the first thing we do. We embrace it. We welcome it as a positive indicator. So we look at all the reasons why self-doubt is positive. So you're willing and open to question yourself. There's empathy there. There's compassion. There's a route to growth. So talk about this thing that you desire that's important. So it means that you're growing in a direction that's important to you. So that's really what I'd say about that.
Yeah, that is so refreshing, because I think you're so right. We're not doubting ourselves if we don't think it's important, the topic that we're doubting ourselves about, right? And so this connection with importance and really, wanting, I guess in a way, it's like we want to, for us gentle marketers, for example, we want this to resonate with our kind of people. So we're doubting whether it will resonate or not, right?
Yeah.
And I can give a personal example right now. I'm doubting my subtitle of my upcoming book. The two of us are both writing a book. And so I'm doubting the subtitle. Why? I'm well, first of all, yes, I have a desire to write this book. It's important to me. And it's so outside my comfort zone because I've never written a book. I'm like a total newbie here. And so there's all these, authors who give me advice and I really doubt myself. Well, how can I pick the right one that is still right for me? Because gentle marketing is all about giving yourself permission to listen to what's important to you as well. And at the same time, taking in the advice from others who have already done it. So, so true, everything you just said.
And I think the other thing that comes up around that is around how self-doubt will take you directly to your fears. So often there's a fear of being judged or misjudged.
Yeah.
And so it's about really meeting that. Okay, I'm fearful of being judged. I'm fearful of getting this wrong. And, and often it's just not seen as fear is not seen as a welcome experience either. Well, fear and self-doubt, obviously, very linked.
Right.
But it gives you an opportunity to get to the heart of those fears and work with them and really challenge them.
Mm-hmm.
So, instead of overriding them and just ignoring them, is going to take you to the heart of right, what that's about.
So what about imposter syndrome then?
So imposter syndrome. Yeah, so it's interesting. I wrote an article about this fairly recently, and I have a number of, I guess, opinions around this. And the first thing I would really say about this is that I'm not an expert in these matters. I'm a life coach, and a life coach is not an expert. And I don't say that in an overly humble kind of manner. I say that in a way that actually there's a real benefit to working with a coach in that non-expert space, because we just meet together and we're collaborating, we're just having a conversation, we're just exploring and unfolding. So what I'm about to say doesn't come from an expert opinion, but just my experience, I guess, around this work. So I think the thing about imposter syndrome is that it's interesting when looking at in relation to self-doubt, because I think imposter syndrome is quite a popular phrase nowadays.
Yeah.
And people will almost say, "Oh, I'm being an imposter," rather than saying, "I'm doubting myself."
Mm-hmm.
So
without
I think
really knowing what it means. It's without one of the buzzwords almost.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like adopting a label, like a trendy label. And that sounds rather critical, me saying that, but I would just caution before saying, "Oh, I'm being an imposter." And because there's one thing about, sort of identifying yourself with a label that sometimes can be quite limiting to do that, because I'm just an imposter, and then, where do you go from that? So that's one thing. Now, as I said, I wrote an article about this recently, and the term imposter syndrome, well, I guess it's the experience we relate to. There's two areas around the experience that I've noted we relate to imposter syndrome, and one is around feeling like a fraud. Mm-hmm. So this is a characteristic of the imposter syndrome, is like feeling like a fraud. And so a lot of people seem to adopt this when perhaps they're new to something. So they're doing something new and untested. They're perhaps maybe new on a senior management team and going into a meeting for the first time and feeling like a fraud, or identifying that feeling like a fraud. But actually what you're feeling is a sense of maybe not belonging in that environment. Mm-hmm. And that's natural. When you're new to something, you're in a new environment or you're doing something new, it's natural to feel like you're not quite belong, and you don't quite know what you're doing yet. You're at the beginning of the learning curve, and it's natural to feel like that. And that's even, a positive space. Like I talk about self-doubt being a positive space, so it can be a positive indicator. Being new somewhere, you're in this zone of growth. And there can be a real benefit to being in that position. Say perhaps you're new on a team. There can be a real benefit to having that new position on a team. So I wish it would be a space that people could embrace a lot more, that sense of not belonging, rather than fighting to belong in a place, because sometimes that can take you away from your values, that wanting to belong. So I wouldn't sort of really identify that as the imposter syndrome, actually. I would say that as if you're new to something and you're feeling that sense of being a fraud, it's just about being at the beginning of a learning curve and maybe not feeling quite confident in what you're doing yet. And there's a lot of benefits to being in that space. Then the other area that it comes up, that I've really seen it come up in my work, is around acknowledging our achievements. So this is something that's really characteristic of people who experience high levels of self-doubt, is they have real difficulty acknowledging their achievements. So they'll work really hard to do something. This has come up again and again and again. They'll work really hard to do something. They'll achieve it, and then they'll automatically discount it as not important, or it couldn't have been that important or that difficult because I've managed to do it. And so that's generally a reflection of the person's self-worth. Mm-hmm. So then we look at that. And, one of the most impactful questions I ask around the coaching or have asked in certain scenarios is, well, where were you this time last year? What were you doing? And when people reflect upon their growth over a year and really reflect upon that from a more curious angle rather than that judgmental angle, is that they can recognize their growth over that year. So, and often people can experience that sense of achievement. Now, where I'd say the imposter syndrome comes in is people are really unable to experience that sense of achievement. There's a barrier there. And, this is how I've seen it manifest in the work that I do. And really what that barrier is it's about survival. It's really indicating probably some more complex survival strategy, which is possibly related to trauma. And I think that's really where you can identify, that, this is the imposter syndrome, which is not a diagnosis, by the way. The imposter syndrome, it's not a diagnosed condition, but it's something that I guess can help when you get into that space. So, I often think that it's somebody who's, people use imposter syndrome when they could be saying, well, I'm doubting myself, or I'm just having this sense of not belonging, and seeing the benefit in that. Or, and it's a bit like somebody who is like really likes control and order in their life, calling themselves obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's a little bit like that,
Mm-hmm.
So I do wish people would be a little bit more open about maybe feeling like they're not belonging and self-doubting, rather than just going to the label of imposter syndrome, because it discounts that label in some way as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. At the same time, it kind of is this nice mask to hide behind, right? I see kind of the imposter syndrome, the term, kind of like a mask that you just hide behind and say, oh, that's the label that I'm going to give myself. Because self-doubt, that is much more daring if you say, oh, I'm just doubting myself. Where the imposter syndrome is like, I have this, and so it's the label. So what you're really saying is like, it takes really deep work to, kind of go to the source of why are you doubting yourself? Why do you feel like a fraud? And why do you feel like you're not enough and not belonging? All of this, it's deep work for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that makes sense, the distinction I made there. Yeah.
It does. So there seems to be some similarities and then also some differences between.
Yeah, there's definitely links. There's definitely, areas where it links, but I think there's a definite difference is when you come up against that inability to acknowledge your achievements, and then that really linking to being a survival strategy and a defense. Yeah.
Another topic I wanted to bring up was hesitation, because, with marketing and just in the doing world. So there is the being world, which is the self-doubt, that's being. And then somehow I usually say entrepreneurship is like a dance between the being and the doing. So you need to at some point go into the doing. And so this idea of hesitation comes in, and the question is, well, is that friend or foe in marketing? Because right now you kind of talked about the positive things of self-doubt, and I totally see them and get them. At what point maybe is there a link to procrastination?
Yeah, so it's another really interesting question. I've got rather a lot to say about. Self-doubt is about hesitating. So when I was redefining self-doubt, I went back to the etymology of the word doubt, which is to hesitate or be in two minds. So it is a space of hesitation, it's a space of reflection, it's a space of questioning ourselves. And so my work is about embracing that as a positive space, and it's about meeting yourself with gentleness and compassion rather than judgment. So procrastination, the label procrastination, for me, I understand that to be a judgment. A judgment really is when it always tends to come with that accusation. This is how I understand it. So maybe people don't understand it like this. Maybe some people see procrastination is more of a gentle space. I don't know, but I see it.
There's always kind of this raised finger.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, you're just procrastinating, get on with it, sort of thing. If it comes with that kind of voice.
Yeah.
So that's judgment for me. And that, for me, that's not helpful, because what happens there is that I get into a tendency of forcing myself through this space into action. And for me, that's not not the most productive way to work. It's most definitely not, because I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy the process, and the outcome is I limit myself with the outcome. So what it's learning to do is about learning to be in that space of hesitation in a much more gentle and compassionate way, and about using it as an opportunity to really connect with ourselves and say, okay, I notice I'm not feeling ready for what I'm doing right now. So what's that about? Mm-hmm. And giving ourselves that time and space just to be with that a little bit more. And again, I think this can be unpopular is because people have deadlines, they have stuff they want to do, they have targets they want to meet. And it's like, we haven't always got time just to sit with ourselves and hesitate and be. But, being in that zone, actually, it's interesting. I'm just writing another article. I'm writing an article about this now, which I'm going to put out this week. But it's about an opportunity to really connect with ourselves, connect with our heart, and connect with what's important to us. And it can be frustrating to be in that zone of really wanting to get things done. I mean, you and I are both in the process of writing books. I wanted to have my book written by the end of January, and that's not happened. Mm-hmm. And I'm quite glad it didn't happen, because it would have come out in a pre-COVID world. Right. And it would have missed something, because actually some of the coaching that I did that contributed toward the book in lockdown has been incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. So it was almost like I'd set myself this arbitrary deadline and then tried to force myself into it. But it was so unproductive. I was not enjoying the work, and I was not enjoying the outcome of the work. So now it's the end of August, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh, God, this bloody book, I wish I could get it written. But in another sense, I look at it and I think, wow, this work is good. I'm really proud of what I've done here. I know this work it's been a learning process for me as well. It's not just writing a book, it's a whole learning process. So, so I'm meeting myself much more gently with that, and also recognizing that just because I'm hesitating, I'm not doing anything. It's not that I'm not taking actions, I am. Mm-hmm. But those actions are just coming from that gentle place. And what comes out is the end of that is something much more rich and rewarding, and ultimately much more productive.
In the end, you will be writing this book. It's a lot about timing, right? And maybe also tied to intuition and just your inner knowing that right now it'll be a struggle to write it. But eventually there will be this time where it just kind of flows out of you, and you're like, wow, how did that?
Yeah, it's so true, because there's some parts of the book I've just sat down and I've just written, and I thought, where did that come from?
I know.
And it's about allowing ourselves to be in the space of not being there so we can be there, because that's not, that's just not human and possible to be like that all the time. Yeah. And also I think I'd be missing something. How hard this book has been for me to write there's great value there. Because I know what's gone into it, and it's definitely going to be worth it in the long run. And as I said, it doesn't mean I'm not doing anything. I'm still coaching, I'm still building my practice, I'm still doing my online, I've got private online community, and so I'm still doing a lot of stuff, but the book will come when the book's ready.
Yeah. All year last year, people were telling me you should write this book, and I'm like, no, it's not the year to write this book.
Yeah.
And then 2020 came around, and
2020 was the year, right?
I know. And it's like my business really slowed down. It was like divine timing for me to just kind of focus on the book.
And there's something we can't prove anything about higher powers and stuff like that, can we? We don't know, but that I tend to believe there's something in that, and it's about learning to trust that space, learning to trust ourselves that this will happen in the right way when the time is right.
Yeah,
that's the challenge. I think
that is the challenge. And right now, the book is finished. I could probably be publishing it, October, November.
Wow. Okay.
Again, I have to practice patience, because I know inside of me that now is not the time to publish the book with all the all the things that are going on in the world right now. It's just not the time. So I'm like, okay, I wrote it, but now I have to, again, sit with it and say, yeah.
I respect you for doing that, Sarah, because that's a challenging space to be in, just knowing I don't quite know why, but I just know the time's not right.
Yeah,
But when the time is right, you will know.
exactly. Yeah. So there is definitely, again, this practice of listening to your hesitation, and maybe saying, maybe it's not procrastinating, maybe I'm learning on another level, and maybe I'm just not ready yet, maybe this is not the time, and that doesn't mean I'm not doing anything. I'm still, things are, sometimes also things are going on without us really, manually doing anything. Like, we're not actually sitting at the computer writing, but we planted the seed, and then things are happening in our mind that we don't even consciously know.
Yeah, and if we don't give that space for that process, then we could miss that.
Yeah, exactly. If we keep doing in this trance of busyness, then our mind is full of those worrying thoughts, and it won't have space to create other creative thoughts. So true.
And you're talking about the gentle business revolution, which I just love that concept. And for me, this work around self-doubt it's an opportunity for gentleness.
Of course.
It's an opportunity just to meet ourselves with more gentleness and compassion whenever it arises. And when we can do that, that's where the beauty is. That's where the growth is, and that's where the real richness comes from.
So true.
Yeah.
I kind of mentioned at the beginning of our conversation this thing that I'm going through with my son Simon, and just in this, he's at the beginning of a new school year, heavily introverted, having to kind of deal with social anxiety, and a lot of the story that he makes up in his head. So this idea of being kind of our life being commanded by our mind, by our thoughts. Do you work with clients on that, and kind of, because the self-doubt, that's what it is, self-doubt, right? This doubt is not inflicted upon us by someone else. It's we are creating it in our minds.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, yes. It's all about working with those negative thoughts, really. The reason that we frame in a positive way to begin with is so that we can get into the negativity of those thoughts. And, what happens is, so I talk about levels of truth, and the first level of truth is where our self-doubt is happening. So our self-doubt is talking to us, and it's saying, you're not good enough, you're incompetent, you don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we meet that self-doubt, we meet those messages with judgment. So we say, it's not okay to think like that. I don't want to think about myself like that. I shouldn't be thinking about myself like that. So we tend to fight those messages. And then we get stuck. We get stuck in this cycle of, Eckhart Tolle says, whatever you resist, persist. Whatever you fight, you strengthen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what's happening by fighting these negative messages. Is we're just strengthening them, or we can overcome them. We can overcome them in maybe with that kind of attitude in maybe small fragments. So we can be approaching a task and overcome it in that, and then they'll come back next time that you're doing something new. So my work is that we do a lot of reflecting and acknowledging. So what happens when you think about yourself as incompetent and not good enough? And that doesn't feel good, and we just acknowledge it. We acknowledge it because it's a truth. It's not the truth, it's a truth that you've been carrying, these messages. And only by acknowledging those messages can we then get beyond them. And then so I talk about the deeper truth, the deeper level of truth. Once we get through that first layer, just by acknowledging these negative messages, we get to the deeper level of truth, or what's driving those negative messages. And it'd be a limiting belief about probably something that's come up from childhood and experience that you've had at schooling. School has a lot to answer for, the school system, targets and achievements and pressures and all that kind of stuff. And, and obviously none of us have got perfect parents, and I'm sure you're the perfect mother, Sarah.
I know my kids will need therapy at one point as well. That's the thing, is you can do the best job you can.
Exactly.
And there's always something that
There's always something. This is just part. This is being human. This is being human.
mm,
So then, what we get to do is we get to meet those deeper messages in a different way and really understand what's going on there. The limiting beliefs. We get to work with those. We get to work on that level, and that's where the change happens. That's where the change happens, because ultimately that's what's driving all of this stuff. But yeah, it's at every stage. It's about meeting it with compassion, taking away the judgment, acknowledging what's going on, and just not giving ourselves a hard time, because that becomes so natural. Yeah.
it's just really always comes back to that, to going deep and knowing your story, owning your story, letting go of some limiting beliefs that have been, inflicted on you by others, and that's what the P of personal power in the gentle marketing mandala is all about. Is like, well, who are you? Who were you? Like, there's one chapter in the book where I say, who were you at 7 years old? Because that's really the age where we haven't been conditioned yet. And that's what it comes down to, is like finding back the real authentic you.
Yeah. Yeah.
If only it wasn't so difficult, right?
Well, I think it can be difficult. It's difficult when we don't give ourselves that time and that space to do it, and that connection. Yeah,
it's true. I wouldn't say it's like difficult. It's kind of a vague word, because it can also be beautiful and difficult.
Beautiful. I think maybe unnatural. It seems unnatural. A lot of the approaches we talk about, and certainly approaching life gently rather than it just seems unnatural to what we've always known and experienced, and what we see out there in the world, which is about targets and achievement and just getting on with it and pushing through it, and and all that stuff. So it's counter to all of that. So perhaps unnatural, but I think becoming more natural, hopefully.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And that's, again, to tie back to what we're going through right now. I think that's really been the blessing in these last 6 months, is that what was so unnatural before, for quite a few people I talk to, has become a bit more natural, to just, have less to do and have more time.
Wonderful. I'm so encouraged to hear that.
Yeah, to connect, right? And not depending on who you talk to, they're not all gonna tell you, they're not all on the same woo-woo level, but they like, just by the mere fact of not having so much to do, well, they have more time to be with themselves. And hopefully these questions do come up. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing. Please do share.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. It's just a real pleasure to talk about this, and I love the concept that you're developing here as well, and look forward to seeing your book when it comes out.
Thank you. And me too. We will mention, we'll update the show notes when yours is out, but we'll already mention that it's coming out. But do tell listeners where they can connect with you and find you.
Yeah, my website, oliviadasilva.com. I'm sure you can put a link to that, I think, can't you? The De Silva, bit unusual spelling, but anyway, oliviadasilva.com.
I'll put the link in the show.
Yeah, you can find it in there. If you're interested in finding out more about this work around the purpose of self-doubt, I have a private online community, which I run weekly live sessions, although I'm having 2 weeks off from now, but I have run weekly live sessions by Zoom, and where I just explore all the ideas related to the purpose of self-doubt. And most often I have guests, and sometimes I do this on my own, but people are welcome to join live and shape the conversation and ask questions and make contributions. I love connecting with people through the work, so that's why I've created that. And I don't love social media, so that's why I've created this online community. So that's The Doubters, and you can find that through my website. And then the other thing is I have fairly recently launched a 5-session coaching model for finding the purpose of self-doubt. And I've launched that at a 50% discount, which is £450 for 5 sessions. Oh, look at me selling myself.
There you go. No more self-doubt.
Can be done. Yeah. But so the final offering is going to have all sorts of resources, including the book, but related to non-judgmental awareness and meeting ourselves with compassion and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, and I must get you
found on your website too.
Yeah, and I must get you to come on the Doubters, Sarah.
I would love to.
Yeah, we'll organise that.
Organise that. I always have a last question that I'm asking my guests. What are you grateful for today or this week, Olivia?
So much I'm really grateful for in life. But I think I would have to say I'm really grateful to be living in the times we're living in, I think there's so much benefit to being where we are in the 21st century. I know there's so many trials and challenges, and in a way, a lot of things that are coming to light now, as you said earlier, is stuff that's already been happening. But we're seeing stuff come to the surface, whereby we can't ignore a lot of the problems anymore. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of hope for the next generation, the millennial generation coming into power, really, and what the changes are going to happen there. And I just think it's a fantastic time to be alive because of how easy it is to connect and how easy it is to access the wonderful work that so many people are doing out there. There's so much available. So, yeah, I think I'll say that.
Yeah, and so true. Like, how would we stay so inspired, if we lived 100 years ago? Like, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, you're so right. We have access to so many different things and can really stay in that high level of inspiration where if it's just you and your family and, cooking and cleaning, that would have been. I'm grateful for living in this time too.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Thanks so much for coming on to the show. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please do check out Olivia's website for more information about her at oliviadasilva.com. You'll find the link in the show notes. She also has a private online community where she goes live once a week and where I was a recent guest. It's like a podcast, but people can attend the recordings and shape the conversation. It was a very beautiful, inclusive experience for me. So that's at oliviadasilva.com/doubters. Again, that will also be in the show notes. I'll also mention my Gentle Confidence mini course again. That's a short video course to boost your confidence with 10 gentle ways. And that's at sarahsinakochi.com/gentle confidence. And I should mention that that's absolutely free. Again, all those links can also be found on the show notes page, sarahsinakochi.com/GBR60. On Wednesday, I'm posting the third part of our chakra series. And then next Friday, I have a beautiful conversation about holding space. I hope you'll join me on this journey to a kinder marketing paradigm. If anything you hear here resonates, I'd be super grateful if you share it with a friend. You can share the gentlebusinessrevolution.com because it has access to the podcast and also a free download of the Gentle Business Manifesto. Let's be the change we want to see in the world. Speak to you soon.